The internet is something that has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. I never really knew a day without it, partly due to my age. As someone who is Gen Z, I would be confident in saying that I know a lot about it and how people act, the do's and don'ts, so on and so forth. I'm also a big fan of SpongeBob, despite the fact that my last SpongeBob review was a bit over a year ago now. But what happens when SpongeBob tries to make social commentary on the internet? Well, you get this episode. I'm Papercut, and this is my review of Bulletin Board, the next step to Review 25.
Pineapple wanted delicate flower. Come in, delicate flower.
I am not answering to delicate flower!
Seeing as how I haven't talked much of SpongeBob recently, it was certainly interesting to tackle this show from a critical perspective after so long. The episode begins with Mr. Krabs in a conversation with a customer. It's always nice to see him interacting with his customers about their experience at the Krusty Krab. It gives us the impression that he genuinely cares about the quality of the restaurant, something that isn't focused on too often. However, as we'll go on to see, his character doesn't get the best of treatment in this episode. After this customer here says that she doesn't feel like telling people about how good her meal was, Mr. Krabs looks like he's about to do something that'll land him 25 years to life. His main motivation throughout this episode is money, as usual. The problem that he faces is that the episode shows a real lack of understanding of how a business like his makes money. I don't really get why he'd be so vexed here. Like, these people are already in here eating your food, so there's no need to advertise the good quality to them when they're already experiencing it. SpongeBob proposes the idea of putting a bulletin board in the Krusty Krab, where people can share their opinions about their experience, which Mr. Krabs would obviously see as a money-making opportunity, kickstarting the rest of this episode's plot.
My Krusty Krab meal was delicious. I cannot recommend it enough. Well, I was just gonna loiter, but now I think I'll get a Krabby Patty.
I know it would seem like nitpicking to focus on this one joke, but it'll really highlight a problem that I have later on. I get that the joke would be that it would be ridiculous for someone to loiter inside a restaurant without the intent of buying anything, but it just doesn't work for me here. It's hard to suspend my disbelief that such a good and well-established company would have people just loitering in it without the intent of even buying a Krabby Patty. The problem this episode faces is that it wants to make you believe that the board is the driving force for all of the profit they're making, but this is false due to two reasons. One, the setting of the episode, and two, what the episode becomes about later on. To tackle the first issue, the episode is set in the Krusty Krab for its entirety. This is also where the bulletin board is for its entirety. So with that in mind, I fail to see how this would attract outside customers to the restaurant. If everything positive written about the Krusty Krab is written within the Krusty Krab, I fail to see how this would make more profit. You could make the argument that since he's probably charging extra for the use of the board, he is making more money, but that's never explicitly shown in the episode. The only thing we see is Mr. Krabs selling pens and paper. Not once is the bulletin board shown to be something that you have to pay for. And you might also be saying, but paper, there's shots here where there are notes outside. He could get new customers that way. And to that I say, I applaud your critical thinking. But you'd have to assume that since the notes are so small, you would already have to be in the vicinity of the restaurant to be able to see them. And even besides that, this was after all the negative comments started to spread. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's just no way of saying that the board itself is the money-making scheme that it actually is. One thing they do a good job of is building up the pros of the bulletin board. They show different members of Bikini Bottom all feeling good about the board's usage. This helps in accentuating the fall to come.
When I eat at the Krusty Krab, all I get is a dark, empty feeling inside. P*7.
Whoa, dude, what's with the censorship? The community bulletin board is for everybody. You can't just take something down because you think it's bogus.
Now, this is what a lot of people will grasp onto as their reasoning for this episode being good. The multiple analogies that the episode puts out about the negative effects of internet culture are very interesting. Look, do I agree with the surfer fish here? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it was a good idea to show how quickly negativity can spread on the internet from just one source? Yeah, it's certainly not a bad idea, and there are many ways to portray it. The one thing that I actually liked about this episode is that it highlighted these problems in a good way without making use of smartphones, laptops, whatever. The writers clearly had the ability to tell this narrative in a much more interesting way than other episodes of this type could. My main issue comes from the fact that the consequences of the board are extremely misrepresented. The episode tries to tell me that people will naturally flock to a place where they can present the worst side of themselves, which does have some truth to it. However, when shit really hits the fan, and bad things are said about the Krusty Krab, you would think that that would hurt the business, and they would lose customers, but it doesn't. To illustrate my point even more, I'll use my own analogy. Let's say after somebody gets cancelled, quote unquote. Usually what happens is that if the person can't bounce back from the allegation, their following slowly diminishes, and they eventually fade from the public eye. If this episode is trying to draw parallels to the internet, you would think that my analogy would hold true here. The problem itself is extremely misrepresented, which is why I don't look at this episode in high regard. SpongeBob tries to make peace with P*7, who ends up being, well, you take a guess, but it ends up creating a snowball effect, where he gets trolled more and more by the customers. And actually, that's another thing I never understood. Why are the people in Bikini Bottom so mean in this episode? I get that it's needed for the plot to work, but they just seem extra mean-spirited here, particularly to SpongeBob, especially considering that these people come to the Krusty Krab and treat him with respect after and before this episode. It makes no sense as to why they would disrespect him like this. If they hated his food so much, why not just go to the chum bucket?
You may be handsome, handsome lad 42, but you're very mean.
Heck, they don't even come to the Krusty Krab to eat. They just go there to utilize the board. And speaking of Mr. Krabs, he goes quickly from wanting to remove the board to actually feeding its negativity for profit, which we just established is not the actual reason the business is booming. He could have easily just conjured up another money-making scheme, back to wanting the board removed later on when his establishment is threatened, which was literally happening since the beginning of the episode. His character is just so inconsistent throughout the episode. Okay, I'm losing my mind. Let's move on. So the bulletin board becomes more and more popular. Honestly, God, I love Bubble Bass here. His language and his voice really make all of his lines shine in any episode he's in.
You may not like what P*7 has to say, but you have to agree that he keeps it real. He's a true hero for our troubled times.
The episode does this thing where it's made very obvious to the viewer that Patrick is P*7, but the actual cast of characters don't know that piece of information. And while I could go on and on about how dumb that is, that no one can take a guess as to who it is, despite the last word in the name being star, and there's only one star in the show, that's not my main issue. My main issue is that he's written in such a way that makes him look way more stupid than he usually is. And I'm talking by season 9 standard. What I mean is, we all know Patrick loves food. It's something they focus on a lot in later episodes, most of the time to my annoyance. So you would surely think that a loyal customer to the Krusty Krab would surely know how to tell people that he really likes Krabby Patties in a way that wouldn't be misunderstood. I mean, think about it. He's capable of going on and on about how much he loves food in other episodes, but all of a sudden in this episode, he can't tell how saying that something tastes like old mitten gloves sounds like a bad quality for food to have.
What's wrong?
It's his P*7. He's been saying terrible things about me and the Krusty Krab.
He probably meant his stomach was dark and empty and he was hungry for more.
It's trying so hard to suspend my disbelief, but it's failing so miserably. Blah blah blah, more filler. Squidward does this bit where he says that he doesn't care about the bulletin board, but the moment it affects him it's a problem, and then he says that he's working at the Krusty Krab ironically, which, if the past 20 years of SpongeBob are trying to tell me that Squidward is working for a dead-end job where he's unable to pursue his dreams of being a musician as an ironic joke, then I really don't even know why I'm here at this point. After going too far, the gang decide to stake out the restaurant to find out the identity of P*7. As it turns out,
Patrick, you're P*7?
the episode closes off with a message about how the platform is not to blame, but rather the absolute maniacs that use it. The gang make amends and go knitting, and that was Bulletin Board. Not my favorite episode by any stretch of the word. While I appreciate the messages it was trying to convey, the lack of a good story and character definition is what ultimately held it back in my opinion. Overall, not an episode I would recommend. Anyways, I hope you have a good day, and I'm going to lie down.